Before we begin this episode, please heed the following warning on the screen now. If you're an audio listener, you're going to have it read out to you shortly, but basically, this one's going to be a heavy episode, so no intro, no outro, cards of any kind. We're just going to jump right into it. Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of The Business of the Starving Artist with Hayden Woods. And today, we're going to take a much more serious approach to the world of the starving artist. As a warning, the following episode deals with very heavy topics of mental health, depression, alcoholism, and more. If you are sensitive to these kinds of discussions, you may not want to watch this episode. And if you are experiencing any point where you have this sense where nothing is going right and you need to reach out to someone, I encourage you to call 988 or 1-800-662-HELP. This episode is going to be called When the Going Gets Tough, because when you are someone who is taking the kind of a leap that either self-employed individuals do or a lot of creative individuals do, you're going to experience a lot of the going getting tough. And I'm going to take this episode to share, again, kind of the beginning of my business, because this is where the lowest dip occurred, but it all stems from a pretty lengthy history of alcoholism, undiagnosed depression, and a lot of these other things. So in order to get to the lowest of the low, we have to rewind back to 2010. This is the year that I was graduating high school, but this also hit another one of the lowest lows within my life. And it was the untimely and heartbreaking death of my mother, Amy Lynn Haggerty Camerman, on June 17th, 2010. Her death was caused by a second round of cancer, a stomach gastrointestinal cancer that metastasized to the point where once the treatment was completed, or so we thought, and they went to Seattle to perform the surgery, they had discovered that that treatment did absolutely nothing, and she had crossed over to essentially a point of no return. It was the best Mother's Day ever, I bet. Getting that kind of a phone call and just having the first of many, many breakdowns and freakouts, kind of leading up to that unfortunate day. And this kind of spiraled into a multitude of poor decisions that led to this unfortunate downfall. I just spilled my coffee. I'll be right back. And we're back. Sorry about that. Basically, we all handle these kind of things in our own way. And unfortunately, for me, that wasn't handled anywhere remotely close to the right way. I can't say that there's a definitive right way that works for everyone, but the way that I handled it was definitely not it. This was also the point where I had graduated high school, so on top of all of this, I'm still trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to be doing with my life. And in the beginning, it was to do music, but as a music educator in a public school. So I had signed up for the community college and basically left 2 months after she passed, with no time to actually grieve and mentally process what was happening. It was just kind of shoveled away. And for a while, there was some therapy that tried to help, um, but I don't think I took it as seriously as I should have. And basically, it led to a number of things, leading off with as soon as I graduated from the community college, there was no plan for the next step to get a bachelor's degree because the place I went to only offered a 2-year associate's program. So I transferred back home, which basically just put me right back in to that whole situation, essentially, of a household broken by grief. And for me, ultimately, leading to the beginnings of my alcoholism. Any kind of substance abuse, for the sake of not really processing, but tampering rather the grief, the dread, and the depression, only leads to more of that. And it compounds. And it led to me dropping out of school in 2014 in favor of becoming a food service individual. And if you know someone who's worked in the food service industry, they will tell you that it is not an easy road. And I mean, unfortunately, I kind of fell into the same trap where I just became miserable. And it got to a point where you basically get up, have a beer, go to work, drink some more, finish work, drink some more, go home, go to bed if you haven't already thrown up all of it, and then get up and do it all over again. And on your days off, you're basically just sleeping. And for me, it led to missing out on a number of family things, because again, it's kind of hard to face kind of the big reality that happened. And after a while of doing the food service thing, I took the only real step towards doing what I wanted to do by going back to school. And it wasn't by my own decision fully. It was by an opportunity that was presented, in that the jazz band in my area needed a trombone person to fill out the ranks because they only had, I want to say, 3. So I opted as a community member to join that group, and that basically got me started on the road back to the realm of music. And luckily, this time was much more fulfilling as far as having experiences and actually getting to make new collaborative efforts with new colleagues. And it allowed me to change my focus from being a public music teacher to just getting a music degree and then striking out on my own to build this business. And I mean, during that time, even though things were going better on the college side, there was still all of the baggage that comes from prolonged stifling of facing reality. And even in that time that I went back to school, there was still a heavy amount of alcohol use. And after graduating, I had my plan. I had the plan to go to the private educator route of teaching lessons on my own, but not having that clarity to kind of formulate and figure out what it is exactly I need to do led to the very slow beginnings. And then not having a backup job at least lined up to keep things stable put me in financial duress, with falling behind on leaning on credit cards to either finish out schooling because I already took out enough student loans, or to even pay for things like the power and for food and for gas to do all of these things. It reached a point where I had to get a new job to kind of figure out the in between, or like the while I'm trying to get this business figured out. And so I started working with my sister in a different cleaning company, and it worked. We stabilized a little bit, but again, when you have financial stresses and you have business slow, basically business failing to meet the expectations that I set. And I mean, I like to set high expectations on anything I do because I expect the best every single time. But when you hit a low like that and your business isn't working and you're stuck doing a job that you don't want to do the job, but you have to survive, and then compound that with everything that had culminated from 2010 and probably before all the way until 2019, it reaches a point where you just don't know what to do. And for me, it reached a point where I didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't want to be alive anymore. I couldn't take it. It's not a fun place to be, and for a lot of people, that's where it ends, because when you reach that point, you don't know what you're going to do, and you make these kind of decisions brashly that may seem like for you it's an easy way out, but for everyone around you, it just made their lives much more dark and much more dim without you. And again, for me, working where I was, we were cleaning a middle school, and I had this meltdown, and I was in the counselor's office doing the cleaning, and luckily they had a number. They had this number up that I could call to kind of, one, calm myself down, and then two, figure out, okay, what do I need to do to get out of this? And after work, I basically sat in my car for about a good hour on the phone, basically bawling and thinking that if I don't do something with this, I am going to end it all. And I was able to get in to the local help center to get counseling on all of this and figure out what is going on. And I mean, I don't like remembering that day that much because it was a very low point in my life, but at the same time, it allowed me to kind of pick myself up with a lot of help from this center and go from there. I think the only person that knew anything the day that I reached this point was my sister, because one, she was working with me, but then I texted her, I was like, hey, I'm at the point where I want to kill myself, and I'm calling this number, everything's okay, going to be okay. It wasn't okay at the time, but she was the only one that I could trust to understand what it was I was going through and have the confidence to not like freak out over it, because when I did start talking to other family members, it was met with a little more sense of panic, like, no, you don't need to do that, you should have said something. It's like, this is kind of why I didn't, is because I needed to figure it out. And I mean, I didn't want to put that burden on a family that was already struggling with so much grief and probably their own versions of mental issues, and to have that thrust upon them on top of that, I don't know if that would have been good for them. So I took it upon myself, and I told the roommates that I was like, okay, this is where we're at, and talking with the counselor and getting um, getting scheduled for medication like an antidepressant, I researched and just found that antidepressants and alcohol don't go together. And if I'm going to do this, I need to do this right. So I reached a point where basically that next day was my first day of sobriety, because I needed to clean up in order to get on these pills, in order to get myself balanced, not happy, but balanced enough to kind of figure out, okay, what are the next steps after this? And there is always that upside. When you hit that point where you have no idea where to go, this helped me find that climb back to a sense of normalcy and confronting all of the things that I had carried and bottled up. And I mean, normally talking about something like this, I'd be breaking down crying. The only thing I had to go do was clean up some coffee that I spilled on my desk. But now I don't feel uncomfortable talking about it. It definitely, a lot of these things still, it hurts, but I've got a better sense of control over it to be able to discuss this in a, I guess I'll call it a civilized manner, rather than kind of acting irrationally or angry at the world or at myself or anything like that. But that doesn't happen for everyone. And unfortunately, like a couple weeks after I had my episode, and I had talked to, because I was still helping the jazz band at the time, I talked to that professor, I talked to my trombone instructor about this. And unfortunately, someone else had gone through with it, taking their life and all of that. And unfortunately, it's just like, that's the more common thing that happens, is that we reach this low and we just want out. And for a lot of people, they get out and they leave behind a destructive trail of their friends and their families that are now having to reel from all of this and process and cascade into maybe their own sense of that kind of grief. And it sucks. But we don't want to hit that point. And I'm bringing this up for the sake of this podcast and this line of work, because when you put yourself in a position where you're going to be your own boss, your own breadwinner, you're in charge of everything, and I mean everything. You're in charge of getting the clients, making the income, figuring out and navigating all the financial stresses and any of the changes that come by, whether it's these kind of expectations, or maybe you get to a point where you're now in charge of other individuals, and it's mentally taxing on you, especially starting out. And if you can't grasp the business side to be able to handle it, that makes it hard to make it successful. And then again, if you spiral out of control, it affects about every other aspect of your life. So you need to have things in order to make this work. And I guess that's kind of the point that I have with this podcast, is getting anyone, even one person, to think before they execute the plan for this business. Because otherwise, if you're in kind of a similar situation that I was, or in your own kind of situation with all of these things, we don't want you to spiral down the same path that I did. We want you to stay in control of everything and know your threshold, know your limitations, but also know your strengths to be able to work and move forward with this. This one's going to be kind of scattered, obviously, because again, when we have these kind of discussions, it's hard to address it in a way that makes sense for everybody, but also be able to not trigger anything from anyone. Because I mean, even now, like I said, 2019 was the first sobriety day. That was the day that I hit my lowest low. It still pops up from time to time. Like not as aggressively, but it still lingers in the back of my mind. And I just have to, for me, recognize when it's showing up and be able to address it in a more I guess a more mature manner by discussing it with somebody, getting it off of my chest, or at the very least recognizing where this is coming from. I was telling my girlfriend, like, earlier this week, I've been having nightmares again about working in the kitchen, and I still have no idea where this is coming from. And I think it's just because that was my life for a while. That was the source of, or at least that was a big contributor to, rather, all of these things that we discussed: the alcoholism, the mental health, the depression has been there, I would probably say, for a majority of my life. But the alcoholism definitely developed it into the, how do I want to put this? Into the little inner voice that just gnaws occasionally. It likes to pop in and be like, you're not doing it. You're things are not going the way you want them to. And then you have to kind of get it talked through, not talked out, talked through to figure out where you're going to go. I guess the other thing is that I can't speak for everyone on how to handle this, because I'm just one person. I have my experience, and I do know people who have gone through their own experience or have had friends that have gone through with their decision. So that's why having something like the 988 or the 800-662-4357 is a good thing to have, is because there are people who can provide a more unique approach to your situation to get you out of it. I mean, I had to quit drinking. I had to go to a doctor and get on medication. I had to wrangle in my financial crisis of my own by consolidating those debts into a repayment or like a debt settlement plan. And I mean, that's finished now. So now there's no real debts to think of. So financially, we're good. Also, having the business as strong as it is a big help. And I mean, I got to a point now where, and I mean, I had a therapist ask, I was like, well, why don't you mention anything about a partner? And this was at the time that I was suicidal. I was like, because I need to figure myself out, because I'm broken on my own right now, and to have someone else deal with that is not fair to them. And I mean, now I'm at a point where we've been together for a couple years, and I mean, it's better because I took the time to fix myself and figure. And I mean, I'm still not fully there by any means. This is a lifelong thing. It's like, I am depressed. I am an alcoholic. I do have all these mental things, and those aren't just going to go away. And I think that's the other thing that needs to be understood, is that when you go and you do all of these things, you're still going to have to do a bunch of these things. Like, I should go to therapy every once in a while, just like as a check-in, to be like, here's where I'm at. But I don't, because, like, for me, right now, it's not there. My constant is not drinking and being on medication and being able to talk through all of these things. But that's not going to work for everyone. And for some people, it does get to a point where, like, again, for alcoholism, you may not recognize your own problem. You might have friends that figure that out for you, and then there's an intervention, and then there's rehab. Or for depression, you might just be a shut in, like I was. Like, I didn't talk to anyone about any of this before that low point. I kept it to myself because who else needs to know my problems? Well, turns out it's better if you can talk to someone through it and talk to someone who can help you. Your friends are not going to help you through your depression. I'm sorry. Your friends are going to see that you're depressed and they're going to make suggestions, but that's not going to be the actual help, because you have to be able to help yourself with getting that help. Again, 988 or 1-800-662-4357 for anyone who needs it. That's where you get help. That's where you find a therapist. That's where a doctor gets you on a specific medication for your specific needs, because depression is handled in different ways and for different people. Rehab is getting help for any substance or just any kind of addiction or any kind of straying from a quote unquote self or sense of normalcy. So I know this one was a tough one to it was a tough one for me to kind of talk through and kind of figure out, and this one was one of the unscripted episodes. Usually I have something off to the side to kind of help guide my discussion, but this one needed to be unscripted, kind of figure out and get all my thoughts out there. And maybe this is one where we readdress it down the road, kind of like as a here's where we're at now and here's what has changed, which for me, it's been several years and nothing has changed on it. So the path I'm on is solid. And if you need to find a path, you need to reach out to the helpline to get yourself on your path back to a sense of normalcy. Again, thank you as always for tuning in. As I said, I know this one was a heavy one. We'll be back to the regular business of the starving artist, but this one needs to happen, and it needs to happen a little bit sooner than later, because then we get buried, and that's when the going gets rough or tough. I know the quote. Thanks for tuning in. This is Hayden Woods, and until next time.